Pecha Kucha 110, Stark Contrast. Stark Contrast is the name of an Iron Man comic I'm going to talk about, and it's also I'm going to talk about the contrast between that comic and another Marvel comic, which represent two distinct but regular trends that mainstream comic books suffer from. But before that, let's continue with the Tale of Sparhawk. I've made a ton of revisions to the artwork and stuff, and then I got told this week to offer some more font options. So, I'm going through 1001 fonts again, looking for free commercial fonts. This is not my idea of a good time. I send those, and then I get told, oh, you don't have to use a poster font, because it's not like we want anyone to read what we're called or anything. So then I come up with some more. At this point, I'm just looking for whatever's free. I mean, that's not technically true. I'm trying to find stuff that looks good. But I can't tell if this stuff is appropriate anymore because I've been effing around with this for two weeks, and this is what they finally agreed on. They signed off on it. This is not my problem anymore. I had to change the claws, had to change the tail, had to change the colors, I had to change everything at least once. But that's part of the job. A job I don't know I want to do again. I've got another friend who wanted a YouTube banner and a logo for a channel where he breaks down 1001 films to see before you die in 5 minutes. I did him some stuff real quick, and I spent most of my time testing it would actually work in YouTube, so I just uploaded it onto my default YouTube channel. So this is how the banner works on a desktop. I'm not sure if it's so good or not. I'd have to be a graphic designer to judge the quality of my work, wouldn't I? The clapperboard works because it's movies. I put this together as well, something a lot cleaner, which I thought would look a lot better on YouTube. But it's we both kind of felt like the clapperboard, the chalk style, that's really where we wanted to go. But I just needed to do something clean so I could say, hey, look, I can graphic design it when I want to. So yeah, another book in the Sherlock Holmes series that I read the Necronomicon from last week or the week before. This is earlier in the franchise, before the supernatural stuff shows up. So this is Sherlock Holmes dealing with normal people and solving crimes, although he's in maybe too many gunfights personally. Bizarrely, he meets Moriarty for the first time in this one. I'm not quite sure how many comics are in this grouping by these guys. I do think they're well drawn. The stories are entertaining enough, but it's a bit weird. This book, however, actually does at the back tell you about the other books, or at least two of the other books. Unfortunately, I'm interested in the book that is after Sherlock Holmes in the Necronomicon, and I don't know that there is a book. So this didn't actually help me, but this is what they should have had. And yeah, conspicuous in his absence, Watson. He is in none of the stories I've read, but in Sherlock Holmes and the Necronomicon, Sherlock Holmes is writing the narrative. He's telling the story to Watson in letters. So they've met, and I just don't know where, and it's very strange. But yeah, Marvel Comics. The first one I read was Thanos the God Quarry, which advertised itself as Thanos joins the Avengers, and I thought, oh, this sounds like nonsense, let's go. That's not what happens, but comic books lying on the cover and the blurb, that's nothing new, that's been happening for decades. It's a very fun story that begins with Thanos having no powers, and in true Saturday Morning Kids cartoon style, instead of him dying in the dirt, he gets saved by heroes to go on a silly adventure that ultimately ends up in him getting his powers back so he can save the universe from a bigger threat than himself, which is his son who has the Phoenix Force. Uh, the beautiful thing about Thanos is he's an old school bad guy. He's a bad guy and he knows he's a bad guy. His mission in life is to destroy everything because that's the reason. It's circulatory. It's refreshing, and it's a story you can tell indefinitely. The other story, Superior Iron Man, Stark Contrast, is the kind of story you can only tell once, and then you can't tell it anymore. Which is it's simultaneously it strengthened its weakness, and this is also a fake cover because Pepper Potts is not really at war with Iron Man. Tony Stark is actually at war with himself. The nemesis in this episode is an 8-year-old version of himself downloaded into old Iron Man suits because the new Tony Stark is a bit of a jerk. A bit of a lot of a jerk, but I actually think it's a very interesting characterization. It feels like Tony Stark has become Robert Downey Jr. He's snarky. He acts like a businessman. He says some real shady shit, and he does even shadier shit. Like at the start of the comic, he sells some death plans to America by threatening to sell them to the Chinese and the Russians. I find it a very interesting characterization, but this story is hot-shotting. That's what they call the Attitude Era of the WWE. You burn the candle at both ends so aggressively that the industry can basically never recover. And that's what this kind of story is. A comic book example of this would be Civil War. Because when you make something called Civil War 2, it's obviously a derivative, and while Civil War 1 was about should superheroes register and come clean about their secret identities, Civil War 2 is about like Minority Report. If you know the future, should you stop crimes before they happen? It's nowhere near as interesting, and it's nowhere near as dynamic. And of course, the sad clown of the week this week is Tony Stark, because this version of Tony Stark, where he's a debaucherous, he's the playboy billionaire that Bruce Wayne always pretends he is, that can't keep happening, and Tony Stark can't be Tony Stark's archest nemesis all the time, and those are by far the most interesting Tony Stark stories, the best Iron Man stories, the best Avengers stories. So that brings us to the end of Pecha Kucha 110, and I'll see you next time.